Welcome back to Shocking Stories, where we uncover the most twisted true crime cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, love, and the dark secrets hiding in America's most historic cities. I'm your host, and today we're heading to the sultry, mysterious streets of New Orleans, Louisiana, where Spanish moss drapes ancient oak trees like funeral shrouds, and where the line between right and wrong has always been as murky as the Mississippi River itself. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your very core. This is a story that challenges everything we think we know about inheritance, family bonds, and the price of secrets buried for decades. Picture this. It's a humid September morning in 2023 in the Garden District of New Orleans, where million-dollar mansions stand like monuments to old Southern wealth. Behind the wrought iron gates of 2847 St. Charles Avenue sits the Beauregard Mansion, a sprawling antebellum masterpiece that has housed one of Louisiana's most prominent families for over 150 years. But on this particular morning, the house that had witnessed generations of celebrations, scandals, and secrets was about to become the center of a mystery that would rock New Orleans society to its foundations. Armand Beauregard, the 78-year-old patriarch of this distinguished family, was found dead in his mahogany-paneled study by Maria Santos, the family's devoted housekeeper of 15 years. Maria had arrived at her usual time of 7 a.m. to prepare Mr. Armand's morning coffee, a ritual that had remained unchanged for over a decade. But when she knocked on the study door and received no response, she knew something was terribly wrong. Mr. Armand, he was always up before sunrise, reading his newspapers and checking his business reports, Maria later told investigators, her voice trembling with emotion. When I found him slumped over in that big leather chair, still wearing yesterday's clothes, I knew God had called him home. But there was something clutched in his hand, a little silver locket I had never seen before. What do you think was inside that locket? Drop your guesses in the comments below, because this tiny piece of jewelry would become the first thread in unraveling one of the most shocking inheritance cases in American legal history. Armand Beauregard wasn't just any wealthy New Orleans resident, he was a legend in his own time. The Beauregard family name carried the weight of centuries, dating back to French colonial settlers who had built their fortune on cotton plantations before the Civil War. Through Reconstruction, the Great Depression, and into the modern era, the Beauregards had not only survived, but thrived, adapting their wealth from agriculture to shipping, real estate, and investment banking. At the time of his death, Armand's personal net worth was estimated at $47 million. He owned historic properties throughout New Orleans, controlled shipping interests along the Mississippi River, and had his fingers in everything from casino developments to political campaigns. For 4 decades, he had been the undisputed king of New Orleans high society, hosting elaborate parties, funding charitable causes, and wielding influence that extended from City Hall to the governor's mansion in Baton Rouge. But despite all his wealth and power, Armand Beauregard had always seemed like a tragic figure to those who knew him well. He had never married, claimed to have no children, and lived alone in his massive mansion except for his household staff. Friends and business associates often remarked on his loneliness, wondering why such a charismatic and successful man had chosen to live such an isolated personal life. Armand was charming at parties and brilliant in business meetings, recalled his longtime friend and attorney, Claude Bordelon. But there was always a sadness about him, like he was carrying some terrible secret that he couldn't share with anyone. I used to wonder what could make such a successful man seem so haunted. That secret was about to be revealed in the most shocking way possible. The funeral of Armand Beauregard was a spectacle worthy of New Orleans' theatrical traditions. The service was held at the historic St. Louis Cathedral in the French Quarter, with over 500 mourners, including politicians, business leaders, and society figures who had known the Beauregard family for generations. The cathedral's Gothic spires seemed to reach toward heaven as mourners filed past Armand's mahogany casket, adorned with white lilies and the family's coat of arms. But as the congregation gathered to pay their final respects, one thing became glaringly obvious. There were no immediate family members present. The front pews, traditionally reserved for spouses, children, and close relatives, sat empty except for a few distant cousins who had traveled from other states and barely knew Armand personally. After the elaborate funeral procession to St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, where Armand was laid to rest in the family's ornate above-ground tomb, the real drama began. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week at the offices of Bordelon, Thibodeau and Associates, the prestigious law firm that had handled Beauregard family legal affairs for over a century. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and think about this. You're about to inherit a fortune from someone who seemingly had no family. What would you expect to hear at that will reading? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because what actually happened was beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Claude Bordelon, Armand's personal attorney for 20 years, had prepared for what he expected would be a straightforward distribution of assets among distant relatives and favored charities. As the appointed executor, Bordelon had gathered the small group of expected beneficiaries in his firm's mahogany-paneled conference room overlooking the historic French Quarter. Present were Margaret Thibodeau, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s who was Armand's distant cousin and closest living relative, Dr. Patricia Fontaine, representing the New Orleans Children's Hospital that Armand had supported for decades, Father Michael Rousseau from St. Louis Cathedral, and Maria Santos, the housekeeper who had served the family faithfully for 15 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bordelon began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he opened the sealed envelope containing Armand's final will and testament, "Mr. Beauregard's last wishes are quite specific and, I must confess, completely unexpected." The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of jazz music drifting up from the street below. Margaret Thibodeau leaned forward in anticipation, no doubt expecting to hear her name as the primary beneficiary. The charity representatives prepared their notepads, ready to record their bequests. According to this document, which was updated and notarized just 6 months ago, Bordelon continued, his voice growing more puzzled with each word, "Mr. Beauregard has left his entire estate, valued at approximately $47 million, to a single beneficiary." The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the Persian rug, as everyone waited to hear who would inherit one of New Orleans' greatest fortunes. "The sole heir to the Beauregard legacy," Bordelon announced, his voice betraying his confusion, "is someone named Gabriel Beauregard, described in the will as Mr. Armand's beloved adopted son, and the true heir to the family name and fortune." Margaret Thibodeau was the first to react, her voice rising in indignation. "That's impossible. Uncle Armand never had children, adopted or otherwise. He was a confirmed bachelor his entire life. This Gabriel person must be some kind of fraud trying to steal our family's money." But Bordelon held up his hand for silence and continued reading. According to the will, Gabriel Beauregard currently resides at 1247 Burgundy Street in the Bywater neighborhood. The document also states that Gabriel has been cared for and cherished by the Beauregard family since early childhood, and is deserving of all the love and wealth that our family name represents. What would you think if you were in that room? Would you believe this mysterious Gabriel was legitimate, or would you suspect fraud? Let me know in the comments, because the truth was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. As the initial shock began to wear off, practical questions started emerging. Who was this Gabriel Beauregard? How had he remained hidden from New Orleans society for decades? Why had Armand never mentioned him to his closest friends and advisors? And most importantly, was this will legitimate, or was it an elaborate fraud? Claude Bordelon, recognizing the potential for a massive legal battle, immediately took action. As executor of the estate, he hired Detective Ray Hutchinson, a former New Orleans Police Department investigator who specialized in background checks and inheritance disputes. Hutchinson was a tough, weathered man in his 50s who had spent 30 years working the streets of New Orleans before starting his private investigation business. "I've handled plenty of weird inheritance cases," Hutchinson later told reporters, "but I'd never encountered anything quite like this. A man leaves his entire fortune to someone nobody had ever heard of, someone who supposedly lived just a few miles away but had never been seen at family events, social gatherings, or anywhere else in Armand Beauregard's very public life." Hutchinson's first stop was 1247 Burgundy Street, a modest shotgun house in the Bywater neighborhood. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While the Beauregard mansion in the Garden District screamed old money and aristocratic privilege, this small house represented working-class New Orleans, the kind of place where regular people lived paycheck to paycheck. The house was neat and well-maintained, with a small front porch decorated with hanging plants and wind chimes that tinkled softly in the humid breeze. A carefully tended garden displayed native Louisiana plants, jasmine, magnolia, and crepe myrtle, that suggested someone with both knowledge and love for the local environment. When Hutchinson knocked on the weathered wooden door, he was greeted by a young man who appeared to be in his early 20s. The stranger had dark hair, striking green eyes, and a gentle demeanor that seemed genuinely surprised by the unexpected visit. "Yes, sir?" the young man asked politely, his voice carrying just the faintest trace of a Creole accent that marked him as a true New Orleans native. "Can I help you with something?" "Are you Gabriel Beauregard?" Hutchinson asked, studying the young man's face carefully for any signs of deception or recognition of the name's significance. "Yes, sir, I am," Gabriel replied, his expression growing puzzled. "Is there something wrong? Has something happened?" What happened next would change Gabriel's life forever and expose a secret that had been hidden for over 20 years. Hutchinson later described that first encounter as one of the most surreal experiences of his investigative career. Here was this kid, and he really did look like just a kid, maybe 22 or 23 years old, who had absolutely no idea that he had just inherited one of the largest fortunes in Louisiana. When I told him about Armand's death and the will, he didn't react with greed or excitement. He broke down crying like he'd lost his father. Gabriel's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. He collapsed into a chair on his front porch, tears streaming down his face as he processed the news that the man he called Papa Armand was gone forever. Through his sobs, he invited Hutchinson inside his modest home, which was filled with books, musical instruments, and artwork that suggested a cultured and educated young man despite his humble surroundings. But what caught Hutchinson's attention immediately was the mantelpiece above the fireplace, which displayed a collection of photographs that would change everything about the case. The images showed Gabriel at various ages, as a small child, a teenager, and a young adult, always in the company of an older man who was unmistakably Armand Beauregard. "Papa Armand was the only father I ever knew," Gabriel told Hutchinson through his tears, his voice breaking with genuine grief. "He found me when I was very little and took care of me ever since. He paid for this house, for my education, for everything I needed. He visited me every week and told me stories about our family history. I thought everyone knew about me." As Hutchinson examined the photographs more closely, he realized they documented a relationship that had clearly lasted for many years. There were pictures of Gabriel as a small child, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, holding Armand's hand in various locations around New Orleans, feeding ducks in City Park, riding the streetcar down St. Charles Avenue, celebrating birthdays with elaborate cakes and presents. But the more Hutchinson learned about Gabriel's background, the more questions arose. Gabriel had no birth certificate on file with the state of Louisiana. He had no social security number until he was 7 years old, when one was apparently obtained for him by Armand. He had no medical records from his early childhood and no documentation of how he had come to be in Armand's care. It was like Gabriel had materialized out of thin air when he was about 4 years old, Hutchinson explained. Before that date, there was no paper trail, no records, nothing to indicate where he had come from or who his biological parents were. It was as if His entire existence had begun the day Armand Beauregard decided to take him in. What's your theory so far? Do you think Gabriel is Armand's biological son, kept secret for some reason? Or do you sense something more sinister? Share your thoughts in the comments, because we're about to uncover a truth that will shock you to your core. Gabriel himself claimed to have no memory of his life before coming to live with Armand. Papa Armand told me that my parents had died in a terrible accident and that he was my guardian because we were family, Gabriel explained, his voice filled with the innocent trust of someone who had never questioned the story he'd been told. I never asked too many questions because I was so young, and Papa Armand was so kind to me. He promised that someday, when I was older, he would tell me more about my real parents. But that day never came. The investigation revealed that Gabriel had been homeschooled for most of his childhood by a series of private tutors that Armand had hired. He had never attended public school, had never been part of normal social networks that might have brought him to the attention of other members of New Orleans society. It was as if Armand had deliberately kept Gabriel hidden from the world, caring for him and educating him in complete secrecy while maintaining his public image as a childless bachelor. Armand had essentially created a parallel life, Hutchinson realized. He had this secret son that he clearly loved and provided for, but he kept that part of his existence completely separate from his public persona. The question was why? What was he trying to hide? And where had Gabriel really come from? Don't go anywhere, because what Detective Hutchinson discovered next will turn this entire case upside down. Make sure to like this video if you're hooked on this mystery, and subscribe so you don't miss part 2, where we'll reveal the shocking truth about Gabriel's real identity and uncover a secret that Armand Beauregard took to his grave. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. Welcome back to Shocking Stories. When we left off, Detective Ray Hutchinson had discovered Gabriel Beauregard, the mysterious heir to a $47 million fortune, living in a modest house in New Orleans' Bywater neighborhood. Gabriel appeared to be a genuine young man who had been secretly raised by Armand Beauregard. But the complete lack of documentation about Gabriel's early life had raised serious red flags. What Hutchinson was about to discover would transform this inheritance mystery into one of the most disturbing criminal cases in Louisiana history. If you missed part 1, go back and watch it now, because you'll need the full context for what's coming next. And if you're caught up, make sure to hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think Detective Hutchinson is going to find out about Gabriel's true identity. Hutchinson's investigation into Gabriel's mysterious past took a dramatic turn when he decided to run the young man's photograph through law enforcement databases. As a former police detective, Hutchinson had access to resources that most private investigators couldn't tap into, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database, a comprehensive system that maintains records of children who have vanished under suspicious circumstances. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Gabriel's face matched a missing child poster that had been on file for over 20 years. According to the database, Gabriel Beauregard was actually Gabriel Rodriguez, a 4-year-old boy who had been kidnapped from a shopping mall in Houston, Texas, on March 15, 2003. The missing child poster showed the same distinctive green eyes, the same facial bone structure, and even the same shy smile that Gabriel displayed in his recent photographs. When I saw that missing child poster, everything suddenly made horrible sense, Hutchinson later testified in court. This wasn't just a case of a secret inheritance or hidden family relationship. This was a case of child abduction that had remained unsolved for 2 decades. Armand Beauregard hadn't adopted Gabriel, he had kidnapped him. The revelation sent shockwaves through the New Orleans legal community. But even more shocking was what investigators discovered when they looked deeper into the circumstances of Gabriel's abduction and the connection between Armand Beauregard and the Rodriguez family. Let me ask you this. What do you think could drive a wealthy, respected man like Armand to kidnap a child? Money? Mental illness? Something even darker? Share your theories in the comments because the truth is more twisted than you could possibly imagine. The missing persons file for Gabriel Rodriguez told a heartbreaking story. His mother, Carmen Rodriguez, was a 32-year-old single parent who worked as a nurse at Houston Methodist Hospital. She had been shopping for Gabriel's 4th birthday party at the busy Memorial City Mall when the unthinkable happened. According to the police report, Carmen had turned away for just a moment to look at birthday decorations when Gabriel simply vanished. One minute, he was standing right beside me, holding my hand and talking about his birthday cake, Carmen had told Houston police through her tears. The next minute, he was gone. I looked everywhere, screamed his name, asked everyone if they had seen him. It was like he had just disappeared into thin air. The mall security footage from that day showed a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses approaching Gabriel while Carmen was distracted. The man spoke to Gabriel briefly, then took his hand and led him toward an exit. The child went willingly, suggesting that he knew his abductor. The man's face was partially obscured by his disguise, but his height, build and mannerisms were consistent with Armand Beauregard. For 20 years, Carmen Rodriguez had never given up hope that her son was still alive. She had kept his bedroom exactly as he had left it, had never missed a birthday or Christmas without buying him presents that she stored in his closet, and had spoken to countless reporters and investigators about her missing child. She had always believed that someday, somehow, Gabriel would come home. But the connection between Carmen and Armand went back even further than Gabriel's kidnapping. Detective Hutchinson's investigation revealed that Carmen and Armand had actually met years before Gabriel's abduction, under circumstances that made Armand's later crime even more disturbing. In 1999, 4 years before Gabriel's kidnapping, Carmen had been working as a private duty nurse for Armand's older brother, Philippe Beauregard, who had suffered a severe stroke and required round-the-clock medical care at the family's Garden District mansion. Carmen, who was known throughout Houston's medical community for her skill and compassion, had been specifically recruited for the high-paying position. Carmen was an exceptional nurse, recalled Dr. Margaret Fontaine, the physician who had recommended Carmen for the job. She was professional, caring, and completely dedicated to her patients' welfare. The Beauregard family seemed to really appreciate her work, especially Armand, who visited his brother daily and always made a point of speaking with Carmen about Philippe's condition. But what had started as a professional relationship between Carmen and Armand slowly developed into something more troubling. Carmen later told investigators that Armand had become increasingly fascinated by her personal life, asking detailed questions about her family, her background, and especially about her young son Gabriel, who was then just a baby. Mr. Armand was always asking about Gabriel, Carmen recalled during an emotional interview with FBI agents. He wanted to see pictures, to know what he was eating, how he was developing, whether he was walking or talking yet. At first, I thought he was just being kind, showing interest in my life as a way of being a good employer. But looking back, I realized there was something obsessive about his questions. The situation became increasingly uncomfortable when Armand began making what Carmen described as inappropriate offers to help with Gabriel's care and education. He suggested that Carmen bring Gabriel to work with her sometimes, offered to pay for expensive private schooling and medical care, and even proposed that Gabriel could live at the Beauregard mansion, where Carmen could care for both Philippe and her son. I told him that was completely inappropriate, Carmen said, her voice growing stronger as she recalled standing up to her wealthy employer. I was there to take care of his brother, not to involve my personal life with his family. I made it clear that Gabriel was my son and my responsibility, and that I didn't need or want his help raising my child. But Armand's obsession with Gabriel didn't end when Philippe died in early 2000 and Carmen's employment with the family concluded. Over the next 3 years, Carmen received periodic phone calls, letters, and even unexpected visits from Armand, all focused on Gabriel's welfare and development. He would show up at the hospital where I worked, asking how Gabriel was doing in preschool, whether he was happy, whether I was struggling financially, Carmen told investigators. He offered to set up college funds, to pay for medical expenses, to help in any way he could. It was creepy and inappropriate, but I didn't know how to make it stop completely. He was a powerful, wealthy man, and I was just a single mother trying to make ends meet. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's help felt more like stalking? Carmen's experience shows how predators often use their wealth and power to gradually normalize inappropriate behavior. Drop a comment if you think Carmen should have done something differently, because her next decision probably saved her life. The stalking behavior escalated dramatically in 2002 when Armand began appearing at Gabriel's preschool, claiming to be a family friend and asking teachers about the boy's progress and behavior. School administrators became concerned about the older man's unexplained interest in Gabriel and contacted Carmen immediately. "I knew I had to take action," Carmen said. "This wasn't just inappropriate anymore, it was dangerous." I contacted the Houston Police Department and obtained a restraining order against Armand, forbidding him from contacting me or my son. The restraining order seemed to work for several months. Armand's calls and visits stopped, and Carmen began to hope that the nightmare was finally over. She felt safe enough to resume normal activities with Gabriel, including their regular shopping trips and family outings. But on March 15, 2003, while shopping for Gabriel's 4th birthday party at Memorial City Mall, Carmen's worst fears became reality. In the time it took her to turn around and look at birthday decorations, her son was gone, taken by the very man she had tried so hard to keep away from her family. "I knew immediately who had taken Gabriel," Carmen sobbed as she recounted the worst day of her life. "But by the time we reviewed the security footage and put out alerts, they were already gone. Armand had a private plane and unlimited resources. He could have taken Gabriel anywhere in the world, and there was nothing I could do to stop him." The FBI investigation into Gabriel's kidnapping was extensive but ultimately fruitless. Despite nationwide alerts, international cooperation, and the involvement of private investigators hired by Carmen's family, no trace of Gabriel or Armand was found. The case remained active but unsolved, and Carmen spent the next 20 years in agonizing uncertainty about her son's fate. Meanwhile, back in New Orleans, Armand was beginning his new life as Gabriel's guardian. Using his wealth and connections, he had created a completely fabricated identity for the kidnapped child, obtaining forged documents that showed Gabriel as an orphaned, distant relative who had come to live with the Beauregard family after his parents' deaths in a car accident. Armand was meticulous in creating Gabriel's new life, Detective Hutchinson discovered during his investigation. He had birth certificates forged, created a false family history, and even manufactured photographs and documents that supported the story he had told Gabriel about his past. It was a complete identity replacement that would have been almost impossible to detect without modern DNA testing and database searches. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case was how Armand had psychologically manipulated Gabriel to accept his new life and forget his real family. Child psychologist Dr. Sarah Chen, who was brought in to evaluate Gabriel after his true identity was discovered, explained that young children are particularly vulnerable to this type of manipulation. Gabriel was only 4 years old when he was taken, Dr. Chen explained to stunned investigators. At that age, children's memories are still developing and highly malleable. They can be convinced that false memories are real, especially when the false narrative is reinforced consistently over many years. Armand essentially rewrote Gabriel's entire personal history, replacing his real memories with fabricated ones. Now I want you to think about this for a moment. Imagine discovering that your entire life, every memory you have of your childhood, every story you've been told about your family, imagine finding out that all of it was a lie. How would you react? How would you even begin to process that kind of revelation? Let me know in the comments, because Gabriel's reaction to learning the truth was both heartbreaking and inspiring. When Detective Hutchinson broke the news to Gabriel about his real identity, the young man's world completely collapsed. The photographs on his mantelpiece, the stories Armand had told him about their family history, the loving relationship he thought he had shared with his father, all of it was revealed to be built on a foundation of kidnapping and lies. Gabriel went into shock, Dr. Chen recalled. He couldn't process the information at first. He kept insisting that there had to be some mistake, that Papa Arman would never lie to him, that his real parents had died in an accident just like he'd been told. The psychological trauma of learning that your entire identity is false is almost impossible to describe. But even more devastating was Gabriel's first phone conversation with Carmen Rodriguez, his biological mother. After 20 years of separation, mother and son were finally able to speak to each other. But Gabriel had no memory of the woman who had given birth to him and raised him for the first 4 years of his life. "It was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever experienced," Carmen told reporters through tears. "I was talking to my son, my baby, but he didn't know who I was. 20 years of his life had been stolen from both of us, and I didn't know if we could ever get that time back." The reunion between Carmen and Gabriel was complicated by the fact that Gabriel genuinely loved Arman, despite learning the truth about his kidnapping. In his mind, Arman had been a kind, caring father figure who had provided him with everything he needed. The revelation that this loving relationship was built on a crime created an impossible psychological conflict. "I hate what Papa Arman did," Gabriel said during one of his therapy sessions with Dr. Chen. "I hate that he stole me from my real mother, and I hate that he lied to me my entire life. But I can't hate him completely, because he was the only father I ever knew, and he did love me in his own twisted way. How do you reconcile loving someone who destroyed your family?" As Gabriel struggled with his shattered sense of identity, legal experts began debating one of the most complex inheritance questions in American legal history. Should Gabriel be allowed to inherit money from his kidnapper? Did Arman's crimes invalidate his will? And what about Carmen? Didn't she deserve compensation for 20 years of suffering? Subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because part 3 is going to blow your mind. We'll explore the legal battle over Gabriel's inheritance, reveal how this case changed laws about kidnapping and inheritance, and find out whether Gabriel chose to reconnect with his biological family or honor the memory of his kidnapper. Plus, there's one more shocking twist that nobody saw coming, not even the FBI agents working the case. What do you think Gabriel should do? Keep the money or give it to his real mother? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share this video because this story needs to be heard. Welcome back to the shocking conclusion of our investigation into the twisted Beauregard inheritance case. When we left off, Gabriel Rodriguez, the young man who had grown up believing he was Gabriel Beauregard, was struggling to rebuild his identity after learning that his entire life had been built on a lie. His biological mother Carmen was fighting to reconnect with the son she had lost 20 years earlier, while legal experts debated whether Gabriel should be allowed to inherit millions from his kidnapper. But as you'll see in this final part, the biggest surprise was still to come. If you've been following this incredible story, make sure to like this video and let me know in the comments how you think this case should end. And if you're just joining us, you need to watch parts 1 and 2 first, because you won't believe how we got to this point. The legal battle over Gabriel's inheritance became a media sensation that captured the attention of the entire country. The case raised fundamental questions about justice, victimhood, and the nature of family relationships that had never been addressed by American courts before. On one side, prosecutors argued that allowing Gabriel to inherit money from his kidnapper would essentially reward Arman's crimes and could set a dangerous precedent for other criminals who might try to use inheritance laws to benefit their victims. "We cannot allow child abductors to profit from their crimes, even posthumously," argued District Attorney Patricia Williams. Permitting Gabriel to keep this inheritance would send a message that kidnapping can be financially beneficial for both the perpetrator and the victim. But Gabriel's legal team, led by prominent civil rights attorney Marcus Johnson, argued that Gabriel was an innocent victim who had no knowledge of or responsibility for Arman's crimes. Gabriel didn't choose to be kidnapped, Johnson told the court during opening arguments. He didn't choose to have his identity stolen or his memories manipulated. He was a 4-year-old child who became the victim of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. To deny him his inheritance because of crimes he was powerless to prevent would be victimizing him a second time. The case became even more complicated when Carmen Rodriguez filed her own lawsuit, claiming that she, not Gabriel, should be the rightful heir to Armand's fortune as compensation for 20 years of suffering and the loss of her relationship with her son. That money represents blood money, Carmen's attorney argued. It should go to the person who suffered the most from Armand Beauregard's crimes, the mother who lost her child and spent 2 decades wondering if he was alive or dead. What do you think is fair? Should Gabriel keep money from his kidnapper? Should it go to his biological mother? Or should it be donated to charity? The legal experts were just as divided as you probably are right now. As the legal proceedings dragged on for months, Gabriel found himself caught between two worlds: the false but loving relationship he had shared with Armand and the real but unfamiliar family connection he was trying to rebuild with Carmen. The psychological toll was enormous, and Gabriel required intensive therapy to process the trauma of learning that his entire identity had been fabricated. Gabriel was suffering from what we call identity displacement disorder, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the child psychologist who had been working with Gabriel since his true identity was discovered. His sense of self, his memories, and his understanding of family relationships had all been artificially constructed by his abductor. He didn't know who he really was or where he belonged. The therapy sessions revealed the sophisticated psychological manipulation that Armand had used to control Gabriel's memories and emotions. Armand had essentially performed a form of psychological surgery on Gabriel's mind, Dr. Chen continued. He had systematically replaced Gabriel's real memories with false ones, using a combination of storytelling, isolation, and even mild sedatives to help Gabriel forget his previous life. But as Gabriel worked through his trauma and therapy, something unexpected began to happen. Fragments of real memories started to surface, fleeting images of a woman with gentle hands who sang Spanish lullabies, the smell of homemade tortillas, the sound of laughter in a small apartment filled with medical textbooks. It was like watching someone wake up from a 20-year dream, Dr. Chen observed. As Gabriel's psychological defenses came down, his real memories began to return. It was painful, but also healing, because for the first time in 2 decades, he was beginning to remember his authentic self. Meanwhile, the investigation into Armand's crimes had uncovered evidence that Gabriel might not have been his only victim. Hidden in the basement of the Beauregard mansion, FBI agents found what they described as a collection of child-related materials that suggested Armand had been stalking other families and other children for decades. Here's where this story takes an even darker turn, and I want you to prepare yourself for what we're about to reveal. What investigators found in that basement was going to change everything about this case. The search of the Beauregard mansion revealed that Armand had been operating what amounted to a private adoption ring, stealing children from vulnerable families and placing them with wealthy couples who were willing to pay enormous sums for adoptions with no questions asked. Gabriel had been the only child that Armand had kept for himself. The others had been sold to families across the South who believed they were adopting orphans from tragic circumstances. We found files on over a dozen children who had been taken from their families over the past 30 years, revealed FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, who led the investigation. Armand had been running a sophisticated child trafficking operation, using his wealth and connections to steal children and create new identities for them. The discovery that Gabriel was part of a much larger criminal enterprise added another layer of complexity to his legal situation. Not only was he the victim of a kidnapping, but he was also potentially the heir to a fortune that had been built, at least in part, on the systematic theft and sale of children. But perhaps the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As FBI agents continued to analyze the evidence from the mansion, they discovered something that would turn the entire case upside down. Armand Beauregard hadn't been working alone. The investigation revealed that Armand's late brother Philippe, the man Carmen had been hired to care for as a nurse, had actually been the mastermind behind the child trafficking operation. Philippe had spent years developing the network of wealthy clients who were willing to pay for private adoptions, while Armand handled the actual kidnappings and identity changes. Philippe Beauregard was a monster who used his medical connections to identify vulnerable families and plan abductions, Agent Martinez explained. Armand was essentially Philippe's enforcer, carrying out the kidnappings that Philippe orchestrated from his sickbed. This revelation meant that Carmen Rodriguez had unknowingly been working for the very man who was planning to steal her son. Philippe had studied Carmen during her employment with the family, learning about Gabriel's routines and vulnerabilities while she cared for him during his stroke recovery. "It's the ultimate betrayal," Carmen said when she learned the truth. "I was taking care of a man who was planning to destroy my family. I was helping him recover from his stroke so he could steal my child. The guilt is almost unbearable." But there was one final twist that nobody, not the FBI, not the lawyers, not even Gabriel himself, saw coming. As Gabriel continued his therapy and began to recover more memories of his early childhood, he started having vivid dreams about a man who wasn't Armand or Philippe, a mysterious figure who had been kind to him during his first days in New Orleans. Through hypnotherapy sessions with Dr. Chen, Gabriel was able to piece together fragments of memories that revealed the existence of a third person who had been involved in his kidnapping. The recovered memories led investigators to a stunning revelation. Dr. Marcus Thibodeau, the family physician who had falsified Gabriel's medical records and helped create his new identity, was actually Gabriel's biological father. The DNA tests were conclusive, Agent Martinez announced during a press conference that shocked the nation. Dr. Thibodeau, who had been helping the Beauregards traffic children for years, was actually Gabriel's father. He had abandoned Carmen when she was pregnant and had later conspired with the Beauregards to steal his own son. The revelation that Gabriel's kidnapping had been orchestrated by his own biological father added a final, devastating twist to an already complex case. Carmen had never told Gabriel who his father was, wanting to protect him from a man who had abandoned them both. She had no idea that her former boyfriend had become involved with the very criminals who would later steal her son. Marcus Thibodeau used his position as a doctor to help the Beauregards traffic children, and when he learned that one of their targets was his own son, he didn't try to stop them, Carmen said through tears. He let them steal Gabriel because he thought the Beauregards could provide a better life than I could. He traded his son for money and status. Dr. Thibodeau was arrested and charged with conspiracy, child trafficking, and kidnapping. During his confession, he revealed the full scope of the Beauregard operation and provided information that led to the rescue of 3 other children who were still living under false identities with their adoptive families. "I thought I was giving Gabriel a better life," Thibodeau said during his guilty plea hearing. "The Beauregards were wealthy and could provide opportunities that Carmen and I never could. I convinced myself that I was doing what was best for him. But I know now that I was just a coward who abandoned his responsibilities as a father." Now, here's what I want you to think about. Gabriel had lost one father figure to death, learned that another was his kidnapper, discovered that his biological father had betrayed him and was trying to rebuild a relationship with the mother he couldn't remember. How do you even begin to heal from that kind of trauma? Gabriel's response to these revelations showed a maturity and wisdom that amazed everyone involved in the case. After months of therapy and legal proceedings, Gabriel made a decision about his inheritance that surprised even his own attorneys. "I've decided to establish a foundation using the Beauregard inheritance," Gabriel announced during a press conference attended by Carmen and other victims' families. "The foundation will provide financial support, counseling services, and legal assistance to families who have been affected by child trafficking and abduction. It will also fund research into better methods for identifying and reuniting kidnapped children with their biological families." Gabriel's decision to turn his traumatic inheritance into a force for good was met with widespread praise. Rather than keeping the money for himself or giving it all to Carmen, he had found a way to honor both his painful past and his hope for a better future. Gabriel found a way to take something that was built on pain and suffering and transform it into something that could help other families, said Dr. Chen. It showed incredible emotional intelligence and moral courage for someone so young to make that choice. The Gabriel Rodriguez Foundation, as it came to be known, has since helped dozens of families affected by child abduction and has funded research that has led to improved techniques for identifying and recovering missing children. The foundation also operates a residential facility for families dealing with the aftermath of child abduction and recovery. Carmen Rodriguez slowly rebuilt her relationship with Gabriel, though they both acknowledged that they could never recover the 20 years that had been stolen from them. "We're not trying to recreate the mother-son relationship that was taken from us," Carmen explained during an interview 1 year after Gabriel's identity was revealed. "We're building something new, something that honors both the family he came from and the man he's become." Gabriel also made peace with his complicated feelings about Armand Beauregard. While he couldn't forgive the kidnapping, he acknowledged that Armand had genuinely loved him and had tried to provide him with a good life, even if that life was built on a foundation of lies. "I'm not going to pretend that Armand was a good person," Gabriel said during his final interview for this case. "What he did was unforgivable, and it destroyed my family. But he was also the only father figure I knew for 20 years, and some of that love was real, even if it was twisted. I'm learning to hold both truths at the same time, that I was loved and that I was wronged." The Beauregard inheritance case changed laws across the country regarding inheritance rights for crime victims and led to new protocols for investigating child trafficking operations. It also sparked a national conversation about the long-term psychological effects of childhood abduction and the complex process of family reunification. "This case showed us that the effects of child trafficking extend far beyond the initial crime," said Agent Martinez. "The psychological manipulation, the identity theft, the destruction of family bonds, these are wounds that can take decades to heal, if they ever fully heal at all." As we conclude this incredible investigation, Gabriel's story reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, it's possible to find ways to transform pain into purpose. His decision to use his traumatic inheritance to help other families shows that the human capacity for resilience and redemption can overcome even the most devastating betrayals. Gabriel Rodriguez may have lost 20 years of his life to a crime he was powerless to prevent, but his response to that crime has already saved other families from similar tragedies. His story proves that sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't punishment, it's transformation. If this incredible story has moved you as much as it has moved us, please like this video and share it to help raise awareness about child trafficking and the importance of supporting survivors. Subscribe to Shocking Stories for more investigations that expose hidden crimes and celebrate the courage of those who refuse to be defined by the worst things that happen to them. Gabriel's journey from kidnapped child to advocate reminds us that our past doesn't have to determine our future, and that even the most twisted inheritance can be transformed into something beautiful if we have the courage to choose healing over hatred. Thank you for following this extraordinary story. The twisted inheritance of the Beauregard family may have been built on crime and suffering, but Gabriel's decision to transform that legacy into a force for good shows that sometimes the most powerful response to evil is simply refusing to let it have the final word.